Hi everyone, Chelsea here, jumping in before this week's dive into thrilling local folklore to share some exciting news. Alderney Landing's Bluenose Ghost Festival is returning to downtown Dartmouth this year from October 4th to the 31st. For those not familiar, this is a haunted experience designed by the creative geniuses at East Coast Scares. The haunts are inspired by spooky stories collected by Helen Creighton, our favorite local folklorist, who was the author of the famous book Bluenose Ghosts and who called Dartmouth home. The highlights from this year's festival include The Manor, a terrifying new haunted house, Helen's Shanty, an escape room where you need to find clues, the Creighton Crypt Ride, which is a simulator ride with spine-chilling effects, and spiritual readings, where you get to connect with local mediums for a mystical experience. If you're looking for a scare this spooky season, make sure you check out the Bluenose Ghosts Festival. If you happen to be there on October 18th, you'll be able to see some familiar faces. We're proud to be collaborating with the festival this year, and we'll have a booth set up on October 18th to collect your spooky stories and hand out some stickers and zines. Now, here's a short teaser from one of our friends at the Creators Collective, a group of spooky indie podcasts. Our episode will be starting right after, and we hope you enjoy.
Not all paths are straight. Some twist deep into the unknown. Hey, I'm Amanda Joy, and every Thursday, a new episode of Down the Crooked Path beckons. Paranormal stories, strange encounters, and folklore that lingers long after dark. So take a deep breath, grab your flashlight, or let the mysteries guide your steps. Down the Crooked Path, available wherever you listen to podcasts.
From folklore and fairies
to monsters and mysteries, it came from the Maritimes.
He'll put a spell on you. My co-host, Evan.
Followed by a cat that might just be a familiar. My co-host, Chelsea.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to It Came From The Maritimes, an Atlantic Canada folklore podcast. It's the first day of October, so to all of my other Halloween lovers, welcome to the official start of spooky season, as if we weren't celebrating all year round. Witchcraft is one of my favorite topics, so I decided to start October off with a deep dive into the history of witchcraft in the Maritimes, and a few stories about witches in Nova Scotia. I got a lot of my information from Clary Croft's book, Witchcrafts, Tales, Beliefs, and Superstitions from the Maritimes, which is a difficult book to find, but I got it from my good friend Olivia, who sells books under the name That's What She Reads. So I'd like to thank her for sourcing it for me. I want to preface this episode by saying that although a lot of the stories of witchcraft in this province don't depict witches in a positive light, we're going to be sharing them because it is a big part of Nova Scotia folklore, and unfortunately, witch folklore in general. In the future, we plan to cover more wise women and more positive tales of witchcraft, but it's October, spooky season, so today we're covering the scarier tales. These more sinister stories are a part of our province's history, but they don't reflect our personal views towards witches. I think anyone who has been to my house has an idea of how open-minded towards this stuff I am. Evan can vouch for me.
Yeah, I know recently my wife and I went to a witchcraft themed store, and when we went in, we were looking for a gift for Chelsea, and we kind of were just like chatting, and we were like, oh, do you think Chelsea would like this? And the owner came over and was like, oh yeah, I know Chelsea, she would like that.
See, folks, even though these stories I'm sharing aren't positive, I am. So I've said it in past episodes and I'll say it again. Witchcraft has been given a bad rep over the centuries, but it is typically a peaceful practice involving communing with nature and manifesting positivity. For example, the mission statement of the Pagan Assembly of Nova Scotia states, "Our mission is to build a caring and inclusive community where we ground ourselves spiritually and work to heal the natural world." Unfortunately, witchcraft has historically been perceived with negative connotations, and those who lived an alternative lifestyle or were vocal in their free thought were unfairly persecuted. I wanted to look into why this is, and it seems to be that, essentially, people always want to explain away the horrific events in their everyday lives that seem to have no natural cause. In the past, the church accused the devil for these horrific incidents, and unfortunately, since women were considered the weaker sex, people reasoned that they would be the devil's minions, exerting his sinister plans on unsuspecting people. The earliest records of witches are in Book 1 of the Bible, which was thought to be written around 931 BC, It tells the story of a king recruiting a witch to help him summon the spirit of a dead prophet to help him defeat an enemy army. And of course, there's the famous Old Testament verse that states, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." So many people accused of witchcraft were not actually performing dangerous deeds. They were natural healers or wise women, using methods passed down from their ancestors. Witch trials became commonplace in Europe in the 1400s, with the accused being subjected to inhumane torture to force them to confess to being a witch. Many would confess out of fear because it was the only way to stay alive. As most of us know, witch hysteria crossed the Atlantic Ocean, and in 1692 the infamous Salem witch trials took place. Research has since proven that those accused so-called witches were simply those on the outskirts of society, considered strange by their neighbors, or those who had wealth that others wanted, or even those who were willing to speak against the officials leading the witch trials. I hadn't realized that the fear of witches had spread to Canada as well, until I read Helen Creighton's book, Bluenose Magic. There are dozens, if not more, stories shared by Nova Scotians discussing witches and ways to deal with them. I was shocked by how many people had anecdotes about witches harassing their family and tampering with their land and livestock. Now, in the Maritimes, the term witch was traditionally applied to both males and females equally, and the Mi'kmaq people have their own belief in the Median, which, sorry if I mispronounced that, applies to folks with supernatural powers similar to witchcraft, but not used nefariously. I even learned in Clary Croft's book that there were witch trials in the east coast of Canada, but that will need to be a separate episode or we will be here all day. Evan, had you ever heard of that?
Vaguely, but I never really got any of the details of it.
Yeah, I know. In the meantime, I would recommend checking out friends of the podcast, Canadian Creepies and Tea Tales Talks, because they both have episodes covering Canadian witch trials.
I'm gonna maybe show myself to not be the brightest, but now I'm realizing that I think that we went to a showing by the Two Planks in a Passion Theater of what's that witch trial play?
The Crucible.
Yes, the Crucible. We went
Yes.
to and they did that outside, and I think that might be what I'm thinking of now that I think of it.
Hey, it was a great play.
It was a very good production.
Yeah.
Highly recommend. I think that was over a decade ago, but still.
I think they're still doing good stuff there, though.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. There were a few recurring ideas that people across the Maritimes had regarding witches, so I wanted to share some of these beliefs. Some of these are downright outlandish, but it is interesting to see how some of these beliefs have carried through to modern superstitions. Evan, are you taking notes in case you need this info in the future?
I mean, in case there's some sort of recurring witch trials that you're brought up on.
Honestly, you never know. Now, the general consensus in Nova Scotia in the early 1900s was that it was bad luck to talk about witches or to come across them. Then again, it was also bad luck to come across a woman in general before going on a ship or into a mine, as we mentioned in our Mother Coup episodes, so you can see why talking about witches would have been considered bad as well. Many people told Helen Creighton that to be a witch, you made a deal with the devil by cursing your parents and signing your name in blood. That seems to be pretty common regarding witches, the deal with the devil. So, according to Nova Scotians' beliefs back in the day, children and animals were the most frequent victims of witchcraft. Children who had a spell put on them were vulnerable to being witched later in life, but they could be cured by passing through a split-apart ash tree. You could also cure bewitched children by boiling a coin in water and getting the child to drink the water. If the coin turned black after, it was considered successful. Now, that might have kept them safe from witchcraft, but who knows what else that child was ingesting in the process.
Yeah, I don't know what coins were made of back in the day, so could be a little iffy.
You could also protect a child by putting a necklace of coins around their neck. And apparently a lot of folks in Nova Scotia find coins with holes in them when they use their metal detectors, and they think this is why.
That's cool.
Yeah. So if a child did have a spell put on them by one witch during childhood, and you didn't take measures to reverse it, any other witch would be able to cast a spell on that child throughout the rest of their life. So now let's move on to how witches were rumored to target adults back in the day. Typically, a witch would target you, in theory, by targeting your animal. If a witch wanted your animal but you denied her, your animal would be useless from then on. People thought a witch could force cows to dry out, but you could get revenge by boiling milk you could get from the cow and then cutting the surface of it with a knife. And then you could tell who the witch was because her face would develop a cut on it. If a witch wanted to steal your cow's cream and you wouldn't share with her, she would go out first thing in the morning and pick dewy cobwebs from your cow's tracks, and it would no longer produce. Apparently, pigs' hearts were used a lot in witchcraft, and people thought it was because pigs have cloven feet, which is a sign of the devil. So it does seem that folks thought good God-fearing people could use animal hearts to create their own charms to protect themselves against witches. They would stick pins in it or force a witch to remove her curse by putting 9 pins and 9 needles in a pot of your own urine and heating it on the stove to ensure the witch cannot urinate herself until she removes the curse. Typically, 7 or 9 pins were used in these protection measures. So am I the only one who finds it weird that the strategies used to stop witchcraft sound a heck of a lot like spell work?
I was about to say the same thing. I was like, this just sounds like they're doing their own witchcraft.
Right?
But I mean, the other thing I'm thinking is a lot of the things that you've said so far just seem to be kind of coming up with the most roundabout explanations for people being sick, such as if a child is sick early in life or cursed, with air quotes there, then they're more likely to be cursed or sick later in life because they just have a weaker immune system.
Exactly.
And like same as animals not producing milk or something like that, it's like, yeah, it's probably just a sick animal. But
absolutely.
It seems like just blame woman in general rather than
right?
Try to solve the problem.
That's it. Blame someone who's maybe a little quirky or outspoken and shameful. So if you can't churn butter from the milk from your cow, apparently you were supposed to put needles in the cream, and that would force the witch to come and ask about the cow, and that would prove that she was the one who bewitched it. So goodness forbid you came to ask your neighbor how their animals were doing that day.
I'm thinking, the butter finally works, and then you just have butter full of needles.
Right. Now, you could protect someone you love from witchcraft by boiling their socks in milk that you could get from your cow. And I found this interesting. The reason people think that milk was so often targeted by witches is because it has a transformational ability. I mean, it can be turned into delicious butter and delicious cheese, and that was interpreted as magic. And I personally believe that cheese is a little magical, so.
It is. I feel like I'm like building my own thesis here, but the fact that they're boiling it sounds like pasteurizing. So once again, I feel like that kind of leads back to my illness theory.
That's it. Don't worry, guys. We're cracking the case. So if you don't have pins handy, don't fret. Folks thought that you could protect yourself from a witch by cutting up a coin and using the pieces as silver bullets to shoot a picture of the witch that you had drawn, which would injure her in the process. People also thought that if you hurt a witch's familiar at night, you could injure the witch herself. Another way you could protect yourself from witchcraft was with dogwood. People would use small branches of dogwood to turn them into a small cross to carry in your pocket, kind of similar to carrying a piece of iron to protect from fairies. Folks would also seek out mercury from the local druggist, which could be used in various ways to stop a witch, and I honestly shudder to think of what these could be based on what people are doing to their milk and urine.
A lot of this just sounds like a lot more witchcraft.
It does. It absolutely does. So in Nova Scotia, a common theme is that witches always come to borrow, but you can break their hold on you if you refuse 3 times. A woman from West Pubnico told a tale of a witch who approached her and asked for some green wool. When she was denied, the witch cursed her, and the wool turned red. The woman had to break the curse by throwing a hot horseshoe into the pot. Now, rationally, iron can apparently turn dyes green, so it seems to be a practical explanation. Getting into some of the more outlandish beliefs, one of the more severe folklore tidbits I read in Bluenose Ghosts that we 110% do not ever recommend was that someone recommended that to injure a witch, you had to trick her into drinking half a pint of moose milk mixed with 2 to 3 teaspoons of rattlesnake poison, half a cup of angleworm oil, the brain of 3 rats, and the wings of a bat. Now, I feel like this would poison absolute anyone, so this certainly could work on a neighbor you suspected was a witch, but once again, at what point are you the bad person compared to the person that you were accusing of doing something bad?
This just seems like a very difficult way to do it, and I feel like the rattlesnake poison is, I'm going to say the key ingredient, but also a measure of where would you get rattlesnake poison in Nova Scotia?
Exactly. That's it. The person is like pre-planning if they're carrying around rattlesnake poison.
Also, how do you milk a moose? But that's a different question.
I don't want to know. So one thing that I found interesting is that even though cats are traditionally associated with witches, in maritime folklore, witches are more often associated with rabbits. Apparently, folks would often see rabbits near their cow, and instead of thinking, oh, there's a rabbit in the field, they would assume a witch was sneaking into the field in the form of a hare to steal their milk.
Obviously.
I liked this one because, as I've mentioned before, I am afraid of birds, especially waterfowl, but apparently maritime witches were known to take the forms of ducks. and they would fly over their neighbors' homes at night, quacking to drive them to madness. I mean, that would drive anyone a little batty.
I guess so.
So, as I mentioned before, if you heard a witch is familiar or the witch herself in animal form, the next day you would see an injury present. So one Nova Scotian woman from the 1900s was accused of taking the form of a hare to cast spells on a nearby farmer's cows. And one day the farmer threw a rock at the hare, hitting its back leg. The next day, a mean old woman from town had a broken leg and couldn't explain where she had gotten it. So I found this one interesting as well, this next fact. Some people thought that witches had the ability to remove their human skin to take an animal form, and if you salted the skin, they wouldn't be able to put it back on, kind of like stealing a Selkie's pelt, which you mentioned in a past episode.
I was about to say almost like a reverse Selkie.
Exactly.
That's interesting.
Now, witches were also rumored to take the form of inanimate objects. A blacksmith in Lunenburg centuries ago was in the forge one night, and a hay bale appeared out of nowhere, as it does. So his impulse, which seems counterintuitive when you're standing in a wood building, was to shove his red-hot iron into the middle of the hay bale, and it lit on fire. He heard his wife screaming from inside the house and rushed inside, and he saw her laying in bed covered in burns. So, needless to say, she was immediately suspected of witchcraft, and he kept a stern eye on her in the future.
I'm a little confused by that one because apparently this woman just decided, oh, I'm going to go turn into a hay bale and hang out in my husband's shop rather than,
Hey, I don't write the folklore tales. I'm just here to share them.
Fair.
But yeah, it was very random.
Yeah, it is.
So here's a few interesting maritime terms which were consistently applied to witchcraft. So the process of getting a witch to leave your animals alone was called making clear of the witches. And I like this next one because if I haven't mentioned it before, I like food. But apparently, if a local woman was acting suspiciously and people assumed she was practicing witchcraft, folks would say she ate more than bread, because they felt like that was a sneaky way to make their suspicions known, but it was a vague enough statement that the witch wouldn't catch on to them.
I do like that one. She ate more than bread.
Right? Just kind of side eye slide that into the combo.
It also has the implications, like you mentioned earlier, of women who have wealth that they don't like to explain. They can afford more.
Exactly. After all those fun little tidbits, well, some of them fun, some of them scary.
Yeah.
Humans are scary. I did want to share a few scary stories of infamous local witches with mean reputations. The first is the story of the witch of Mull River. Most Nova Scotians are familiar with the famous Mull River shuffle, which will fill a dance floor at any wedding. But I bet you didn't know that Mull River was also associated with a nefarious woman.
I didn't.
In Mull River, Nova Scotia, there was an old woman with a nasty reputation. Rumors stated that on her 100th birthday, she grew 2 horns on her forehead, which grew 1/4 inch each year until her death at age 118. So 1/4 inch times 18, that's not to be trifled with.
No, that's over like 4.5 inches?
Oh, yeah.
That's some solid horns by the end.
Right? Now, if a neighbor's cow produced more milk than hers, she became enraged, and the next day the neighbor's cow would produce none. She would go a-borrowing, carrying a canvas bag wrapped with iron. If you didn't give her something, you'd have bad luck, and she would scream to call upon the devil to harm anyone who denied her. Her neighbors were glad when eventually she grew too weak to leave her small windowless cabin. They knew she was there because they could see the chimney puffing smoke on cooler days, but they didn't see her in person anymore. As a gesture of goodwill, her neighbors brought her tallow candles so she could have light. But instead of using them as intended, she melted the tallow, mixed it with meal, and ate them. No one knew what to make of it when they heard this news, so they stopped visiting altogether. One night, the neighbors heard stones falling on their roofs, and they assumed something was happening with the witch. The next day, someone investigated, one brave soul, but they found her dead. They burned her house down after she was buried, wanting to destroy any possible curse she left on the land. They even put her iron-wrapped witch bag right on the fire to ensure it lit up. The neighbors stood watching and screamed when an explosion caused the bag to shoot up the chimney, landing intact on the ground in front of them without a single singe mark. The locals, realizing that this bag was the source of the witch's power, buried it in an unknown location. It's suspected to still be in the ground to this very day.
I don't think I fully understand how a bag can be iron-wrapped. Is it just like a bucket with a bag inside it?
The way I envisioned it was like a chain wrapped around it somehow.
Okay.
But I don't know.
It sounds like it has some magical qualities either way, so maybe that's why it doesn't fully make sense.
Well, that's just it. In reality, this could just be a tale, or it could have just been a cranky woman who didn't love her neighbors, and folks started making up very mean stories about her.
There's a part of me that likes the idea that this woman was dying, and then she just like found some gunpowder or something and put it inside the bag, and she's like, "This'll get them."
Right? Like, I'm going to show these people. They spread rumors about me. We're going to teach them.
Exactly.
Now, our next story is going to bring us to Pictou Harbor in 1803, when a ship with 500 immigrants from Scotland called the Favourite arrived. One of the crew had a bad stomach ache, and he was sent to a local wise woman who had healing powers. She made him a tea blend with teaberry, burdock, and sweet honey and told him to drink the brew. She then welcomed him to rest in her home with a cold compress on his head until he felt better. She had some errands to run, so just asked him to leave a coin on the table, whatever amount he deemed worthwhile of his cure, when he left. He felt better almost immediately, but took advantage of the soft bed to rest in. He waited until the wise woman went out, and then made a hasty exit without leaving a coin. She was disappointed when she returned home. She assumed he had simply forgotten. She found him in town and asked for payment, but he refused, claiming her tea had caused his stomach ache, and then rushed back onto the ship. She was enraged, and in her fury cast a spell to curse the ship, chanting, "I curse you by the stone," while marking the ship's name upon a rock with a stick of charcoal. She walked 3 times in a circle, holding the stone above her head, spat on the stone 3 times, and each time she uttered a word that only a demon would speak. She then threw the stone into the harbor towards the ship. That very night, as it departed Pictou Harbor, the Favourite sank into the sea. Not a single soul survived. So, maybe an overreaction, but in hindsight, that man should have paid up.
I mean, honestly, though.
Right? Poor woman was trying to be nice.
Trying to make some money.
Exactly. That's the end of our stories. I do have a few Nova Scotia witch folklore questions to ask Evan, because you know we love a good quiz. I'm not expecting him to know all of these, but we'll give it a go. What was the term used in the Maritimes to describe a witch who was outperforming her craft?
I'm not even sure, like a sorceress?
So,
Or sorcerer?
I guess what would they say she was doing?
Witching?
Yeah, they'd say in the Maritimes, it would have been common in the 1800s, 1900s to hear that a local woman was out witching or out a witching.
That makes sense when you say it with a bit of an accent.
Right? Now, which way should you hang your horseshoe to keep a witch out of your house?
You want to keep it so the open end is up, because then it
Exactly.
catches things.
That's it. She gets trapped in.
Mm-hmm.
And what was a term used to describe a child who was bewitched in the Maritimes?
I really don't know, like a vessel?
So they would say the child was overlooked.
Overlooked.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that is not what I would think of.
Gotcha with that one. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of It Came From The Maritimes. You can find us on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at It Came From The Maritimes. Once in a while, we'll post on Blue Sky, maybe X at ICFT Maritimes. And if you have any Atlantic Canada folklore you would like to see covered in future episodes, or any spooky encounters of your own, email us at itcamefromthemaritimes@gmail.com. If you enjoy our podcast, please leave us a 5-star review to help others find us. Also, we're now excited to be on Patreon. If you go check it out right now, you can see a sneak peek at the newsletter all tiers will receive monthly, with updates on future episodes, events, and a little behind-the-scene action. We'll also be sharing behind-the-scene photos that don't get released to our social media, early access to certain posts, as well as recommended reads. There's currently a haunted hangout where we discuss a location that we haven't dived into in an episode as of yet, and a folktale that comes from across Canada instead of just within our Atlantic Canadian provinces. So please, if you'd love to show the podcast some support, go check it out. Evan, do you have a folklore tip to end today's episode?
I do. Today's folklore tip is, if you think a witch is visiting your house, put a woman's hairpin in your doorframe.
Good to know.
Good to know.
Thanks for listening.